All right. Welcome, everybody, to Excess Exceed, a show that I came up with the name for about 4 seconds before hitting record just now, so we'll workshop that. This is a show where I, Gearface, an inexperienced and, let's be honest, kind of scrubby Exceed player, have managed to trick an expert into sitting down with me to teach a character. And today I'm sitting down to learn Cammy, season three's resident flippy ninja woman, from Viddie. Viddie, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to share some Cammy with you. I love her so much.
I'm excited to get to that because that's actually one of the first questions I have for you about why Cammy works for you so well. But before that, I
Oh.
want to issue a quick disclaimer that throughout this episode and kind of through all of our episodes, we tend to talk kind of prescriptively about strategy and sort of absolutely about it. So you're going to hear us say, this is always correct, this is always incorrect, always do this, never do this. Take all of those opinions with a grain of salt. Exceed is not a solved game. This is the rules of Viddie's strategy with Cammy, and she's one perspective on the character, and although she's a very informed perspective. If you don't like how we are representing how this character plays, if it doesn't sound fun or interesting to you, play the way that is fun and interesting to you, because you will obviously have more fun, but you'll also have more success playing a way that you like to play. And if you find that we are undervaluing some part of her kit or overrating some part of it, or if the opinion is just off, develop your line, take it into tournament, find a way to play Cammy that we're not considering, and then listen, I'm looking for more content. Come on the show. We'll record an addendum. It'll be great. But with all that said, Viddie, you are, in my experience, having hung out in the Exceed community for a little while now, the name that people associate most with Cammy by a pretty wide margin. There's a couple others out there. You know, I know that Taxi and Polter have very solid Cammies, but you are the person that, maybe more so than any other player with any other character, with a couple exceptions, you are very strongly associated with Cammy. And so why is that? What about Cammy, what drew you to this character so hard?
Well, Cammy, I feel like she's really special in that she can really do it all from any range. I feel like her options are limitless and your power is unlocked when you're playing her. Um, she's really the type of character I enjoy with like these really tricky mix-ups while not having a lot of armoring guard.
Mhm.
Which is something that attracts me. I also like characters that are a little bit off meta because I like to push off meta stuff. As for being recognized in the community, I think it's just that I'm a Cammy one trick. Like, this is the only character that I've ever felt so connected to. And all of Exceed's roster, I don't know if there will be another one. I've tried other characters, and there's just nothing like Cammy for me.
That's awesome. I feel like that kind of devotion to a character, like, might be impossible to replicate. Like there's something in the cards themselves that just kind of spoke to you, and you're like, well, this is me now forever, and that's fine.
Yeah, right.
That's awesome. So let's start with just kind of like a general game plan, and then maybe get into the kit breakdown and talk about how we use her tools. So, what does Cammy want to do um, in a
Well,
just a general game of Exceed?
I think Cammy, most often you want to enter a strike and you don't want to get hit, which doesn't always happen. That's like the ideal scenario. You hit them and they don't hit you. And I feel
Okay.
like that's a lot of Exceed, but that is really her bread and butter.
Okay, so she's not looking to trade. She's looking to win her strikes as clean as she can, and use her mobility to get out of the way of things.
Yeah, definitely. She wants to play the best kind of footsie. If she's trading too heavily, I feel like she doesn't come out on the good side of those trades. The damage is going back and forth, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Um, so in terms of how we we get to that game plan. I've got cards on my side of the table or on yours. I'm good with either one if we wanna go through them.
Sure.
Yeah. So how am I leveraging these tools to win cleanly and avoid getting hit?
Well, luckily you have a ton of tools to do so. So you have four attacks right from the get go that say attacks at range X don't hit you.
So we've
So
got
both of
Razor's Edge
your
Slicer.
oh,
We've got
sorry.
our it's all right. We've got our ultras.
Yeah.
Yep. So we
That
got
you
a lot of dodge effects, and we've
I
got dive kick.
Yeah, it's so good. Dive kick probably being one of our best tools because she can come into range when it's usable, at range 2 or from range 3, which makes it a very strong assault like attack. And
Mhm.
you are winning the trade on that almost always. Only kind of gets beat by cross or cross like effects, but you'd have all of these effects that say attacks at this range don't hit you, and using those to your advantage, and just kind of checkmating your opponent into not having anything they can do against it, feels so good.
Okay. I've definitely uh, I've played into Cammy players more than I've played Cammy myself, and it definitely feels like I have uh, uh, had her on the ropes and then suddenly lost 3 strikes in a row that I didn't understand how I lost, and it's because of effects like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, her ranges then, because obviously her looking at her character ability over here, we've got uh, if you move past the opponent during a strike, your attack's range includes them. So that kind of causes us to reevaluate a lot of the things in her kit,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So so for example, even dive, for example,
Yep.
is no longer just a ranged poke or a range 3 mid speed. It's kind of a do everything card. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. At any range that you are could pass them or could come in to hit them, it becomes valuable. Not that
Okay.
it wasn't valuable before, because when you pass your opponent, their attacks don't hit you. But now, not only do they not hit you, you also hit them, regardless of where you
Right.
are. Right?
Right. You're not just saying, well, okay, that strike sort of didn't count.
Yeah.
You're winning cleanly on that.
Yep.
So okay. So um with that said, we've got, now I'm reevaluating some of these cards based on that effect, and I've got, okay, well, this isn't actually a range 4 card. It's like a range 1 to 4 card. This is a whole lot of things card. So what is her preferred range then? Where does she want to stand?
I would say the preferred range is somewhere but like 4 and 5 or 3. 3, 4, and 5 are all pretty good ranges for her.
Okay.
But really, her kit is so versatile that it works from anywhere. There's not a range on the board that she doesn't like. She can find something to do with it.
Okay. Interesting. And also I'm noticing, just looking at this kit, that a lot of her things, obviously she's got no projectiles. She is the projectile.
Yeah.
She kind of everything that she does pretty much changes her position.
Mhm.
So, if I play uh dive at range 4, for example, and I come into here, uh now I'm at range 1, and that's notably not one of the ranges that you just listed. So does she also have like range 1 tools or an ability to get back to range? So I'm just kind of looking for like a general flow of play here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a couple of boosts. They actually have multiple boosts that really help you with changing your position. So you'll have the boost on Gyro Drive Smasher's Hooligan combination. You don't really use that quite as often, just because it's kind of expensive to pay the force and then strike. But if you need to, it's a really great tool to back up. You have High Jump on Razor's Edge Slicer, a great boost. You probably use that way more often than you strike with the actual card. And then you also have backflip, the same as backstep on Cannon Spike, which gets you wherever you want to be.
Right. And generally where you want to be is far away from your opponent.
Far enough away. You want to be able to abuse that attacks at range 4 and 5 don't hit you.
Okay.
And you have a lot of really good mix up options in that area.
Okay. That makes sense. So I feel like that first thing about Cammy that I need to internalize then is her character ability.
Yeah.
That you know, getting to range and then, all right, well, now I'm at range 1 and I see all these things move way past my opponent, but wait, no, they don't, because I'm Cammy and I hit them anyway. So
Yep.
okay, so I'm this is a lot more flexible than her cards make it seem. Okay, so you sort of alluded to this a little bit when you were talking about uh, we probably are going to use high jump more often than we use Razor's Edge Slicer. So let's break down the kit a little bit. So I'm just gonna like let's we just probably go in speed order here.
Sure, yeah.
You want to just talk about kind of the use cases for each attack versus their boost and what this card is kind of for in her kit?
Yeah, so we can start off with Cannon Spike. It's your classic grass blake attack. It doesn't hit very hard. It's kind of like a little paper cut. But the important part is that it has hit, push, or pull 3, which really puts them wherever you want them to be. It's a really, really good positioning for her to be able to push 3 away, because that puts you at range 4 if you're in a good spot on the board. Or if you were to pull 3, it pulls them back behind you. It sets you really nicely up for dive kick or dive, or any other attack that she has. It sets you up pretty nicely for most of them.
Okay.
Backflip is kind of it's strong utility. I would say this card is very medium in her kit, and having a grass spike is always good. But it's not like shiny, sparkly card or anything. It's nice to have, but it's not the worst to just dump it for force or something.
Right. And in terms of normal interactions, this is also a grasp like that cleanly beats sweep, right? Because the push and well, at least with a push, the push effect gets you to range 4 where that's not hitting anymore.
Yep. If you have good positioning, very, very good.
Okay. And a quick sidebar about that, actually, about positioning, because so again, this is going off a very limited experience with Cammy, playing for the most part, playing other players of Cammy who are not particularly experienced either. One thing that I noticed is that because everything that you're doing is moving you around the board, your positioning is a little bit like you have a lot of control over it, but kind of everything you're doing is changing it.
Yep.
So how do you maybe a conversation to have a little bit later in this lesson to come back to is, how are you using your tools to keep the position you want when everything you're using moves you around so much?
Yep. Positioning is definitely everything. And what your opponent knows that you have available is so important, because if they know that you have spike or sweep or normals that are prime at some sort of position, that also affects how they react to your specials and ultras, right?
Right.
So keeping that in mind when you are setting up your positioning is so, so important.
Okay. And the 2 specials that you happened to mention are among the only 2. I'm sorry, the 2 normals that you just mentioned are among the only 2 that don't have any sort of movement effects on them. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that because like grasp moves the opponent, cross moves you, dive moves you, focus you can't be moved. Like almost all of them move you somehow or move the opponent somehow. The ones that you highlighted, even the ones that don't move you, are important to Cammy. Is it partially because they don't move you that like?
It's more like I don't know. You're still always in that mindset of you want to trade harder than they have, right? So like you want to be able to hit them and not be hit back, and just setting up yourself for that scenario where you can hit them and it's profitable to you is the essence of her character.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. All right, so Cannon Spike, Grasp like with the ability to beat sweep, good utility boost on it. You mentioned Dive Kick already as being a particularly strong tool.
Oh yeah.
So looking at this is I'm seeing you called it an assault like, and I can see why. Range 3, speed 5. Yeah, tell me more about this card.
I just personally really love dive kick. I love assault like attacks because I feel like you can be very, very tricky with them. And you also have to remember, because she's Cammy, from range 1, this is completely viable to still hit them at least. You don't get the after attacks at range 1 don't hit you. But you will still be able to hit them for 4 because you passed them and your attack still hits. So it's just a very, very versatile option. And I love when I want to get in close because I'm setting up for CQC. And I get to come in and say attacks at range 1, don't hit me. And you win, right? You win that
Right.
trade.
Right.
Um, but even the boost on dive kick slide is, in my opinion, one of the coolest boosts in the game. I love this boost so, so much. Your normal attacks have advance 3 or before advance 3. So this sets you up for like a lot of really cool mix-ups. One of my favorite opening plays is to boost slide, and then suddenly your entire kit is open
Yeah.
to you, and your opponent is shaking in their boots, right?
There's not a single card that other than maybe like block that if you strike if you strike as Cammy and I'm like, well, what do I do? I
Yeah.
have to consider your whole kit now.
Yep.
And that seems like a theme for Cammy in general because again, having played into her a couple times, it was very rare that I could turn off an option in my brain where I'm like, okay, well, she's at range 1. That means that none of these cards hit. Wait, no, all of them hit.
They
Wait,
all
oh
hit,
no,
yeah.
yeah. So it seems like if she's a character who uh, is trying to throw mix-ups, uh, a big advantage that she has is that her mix-ups. It's tough to run her out of options because everything kind of hits everywhere.
Mhm.
And so again, maybe we can come back to that in a little bit. So you mentioned for dive kick that you like assault likes because you can be tricky with them, and
Mhm.
slide as a boost is is a a boost that allows you to kind of create more tricky plays out of them.
Oh, yeah.
So um tell me about some of the tricky things that you like to do with assault like attacks in general. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's a speed 5 advance too. At its absolute worst, it does at least that for you. So you can, if you play it at the start of the game and you think they're going to play dive, you can avoid a dive just by advancing 2, and then they advance past you and they can't hit you because they're no longer in range. Having a mix-up option like that takes you out of range 1. It puts you into the positioning that you want to be in based off of what you think that your opponent is going to play. Um, I think just positioning is everything in this game. It's really so important in Exceed. And dive kick is one of those tools that you can use to put yourself at an advantage if you know or think that you know what your opponent is going to play.
Okay. So and the use case that you just advocated for, you're talking about playing it from range 4 to dodge a dive by getting here, the way that you would play
Correct.
an assault, for example. And
Yep.
that doesn't even like you're so this is positioning positive on an attack because they're getting over here. You're establishing a range that you want to be at, but you're not hitting. Neither are they. Is that something that you're more likely to play on defense when they're initiating into you with what you suspect is a dive, or is this something that you would play just as with you initiating?
I would always probably play it on defense. I think the type of player that I am personally, I prefer playing on the defense. I will almost always like wait for my opponent to strike because I feel like it gives me a better idea of what they might play.
Okay.
And I think Cammy really thrives when you think of her in that way. As responding to your opponent, you want to outplay them, right?
Okay. So so you're looking for the ways that they are trying to mix you up, predicting them, and then using her tools to diffuse those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so it and I want to come back to slide as a boost because we glossed over part of it. I'm also seeing that uh the cleanup effect kind of uh leads into the stuff that you were talking about tricky plays because I'm noticing that this only works on normal effects, or normal attacks. But if I don't use a normal attack, I still have it. So I'm threatening a really scary normal attack, but oh no, it turns out that everything I have at least will keep I'll either get value out of it or it'll keep the boost
Yeah.
live. So you're putting this down, and you're daring your opponent to strike into you, basically. Um, what are you hoping to pay out with on this boost, or is that so matchup dependent and so situation dependent that it's almost hard to say?
I think it depends at like what point in the game that you are and what options you have available to you. I think slide is a really powerful early game option because you have your whole kit open to you, right? You can really threaten anything. But it gets a little more niche later on in the game because they can start predicting exactly what you're going to play. And that's
Right.
dangerous for you, right?
Right. Okay. And so one thing that I've noticed about my own play, I for reference, and for people who might be in the future sort of cherry picking these guides for characters they want. The last guide that we recorded was with D on Sea Viper, and I cannot play Rushdown to save my life. I play like kind of a defensive set play. The way that I understand this game is by making things unbeatable so that they are safe, so I can play them. And
Yeah.
like that doesn't work with Rushdown. That's not how that works at all. Like I need to throw mix-ups and I need to be okay with them sometimes failing. So I'm automatically thinking about ways that uh, slide could be used to make an attack be, even if they know what's coming, be totally unanswerable. Is that possible with Cammy, or is Cammy such a mix-up character that what you're really looking for is just making them have to respect more sides of your mix-up and keeping your options live to do that?
I think Cammy plays a really good tempo game. And what I mean by that, when you're using something like slide, it can do whatever you want it to do. And you want to be in this position where you're staying just ahead of your opponent. So even if you were at like range 4 and you played slide and then you played cross and you went in and then you went back out.
Right.
You may have dealt a little damage, maybe you didn't. But the important thing is that you got the gauge. And we can talk about Cammy's gauge economy later, but having gauge on Cammy is so powerful. It is
Okay.
really, really good. So having even just one gauge up on your opponent is so strong.
Okay, and to foreshadow that, I'm assuming that part of that is probably for her crits, but I know that her ultras are very, very dangerous as well.
They're pretty fun, yeah.
All right, so we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so that's Cannon Spike. That's Dive Kick. I have read your Cammy guide, your
Oh.
written Cammy guide from a while ago, and I know that Spiral Arrow had a lot of all caps in it about it
Oh
being the
yeah.
best card ever. So tell me about Spiral Arrow.
I would love to, because Spiral Arrow, I could talk about it for ages. It's like, it's the coolest card. It is so, so good. It beats like so many things, even when you don't critical. So you can just play it normally and it hits for 5, like wherever
Right.
you are. Has the longest range. You can play it from range 5, come in and still hit.
Right.
And you can also play it from anywhere closer, like range 1, range 2, range 3, range 4. It's good in all of those ranges. And if you're in a good position, it's so easy to mix up and get away from whatever they were going to play.
Okay.
Um,
And so I'm like stat wise, I'm looking at it and it looks like without the crit, it's super dive, right? It's dive with a little bit of extra range on it.
yeah.
And then the crit, uh, this basically says like anything, because anything faster than speed 4 probably isn't going to break this.
Yep.
And anything
Uh,
slower than it, you're probably going to be able to get away from. Is that kind of the use case?
yeah, absolutely. There's almost no reason not to critical spiral arrow if you have the gauge, unless you're trying really hard to set up for an ultra, or you don't think that they're going to hit you, or you're just going to evade whatever they play.
Right.
But the critical, it gets you around grasp, around cross, like all of these attacks, like they don't get to win when they normally would,
Right.
because of the critical. It's so strong.
And
And when you critical, even if like they were to grasp you or something like that, you get to still be where you want to be with the advance 4, and it sets you up so nicely for the rest of your kit.
okay. All right. So again, like this is betraying my sort of like defensive set play mindset that I'm thinking about this card in terms of how can I use it to beat my opponent's attacks, right? You're
Hmm.
saying that a big part of this is that you play it when you want to be at a range and they can't do anything about it. So if I've got a handful of things that hits at range 3, and you just put me where, I'm over here. I play Spiral Arrow partially because, all right, they're probably not going to be able to beat it. It's probably going to do damage. I'll probably trade positively. It's one of the few things that I have that has armor and guard, but when I crit it. But also, you're saying that the value of this is that it just sets my position for the rest of my hand.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Is that kind of how Cammy's game plan should flow in general? Is that I should be thinking of, how do I put this? Should I be thinking of her cards as positional tools that do damage almost as much as I should be thinking of them as damaging tools that position me?
Absolutely. I think thinking like a strike ahead is so good because you're setting yourself to be up in a certain position on the board, right? And that sets you up for your next strike. And when you have cards that say attacks at range X don't hit you, and that range matters to you, if you know what your opponent has, that positioning becomes incredibly important.
I gotcha. Okay. So this is, we can sort of reevaluate these 3 cards again with that in mind. This is really, really safe range 4 most of the time. Or range 3 sometimes, like if you pull instead. Like there's lots of ranges that this could set. It's so fast that they can't do anything about it. This is free range 1 most of the time. This is free range kind of wherever you're playing it from. This will set a new range for you. So we're talking. I'm thinking about these now in terms of where I'm going to end up, and that's going to influence what I care about playing almost as much as like what specific attacks I'm trying to beat. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Cammy starts to have a hard time when your opponent starts to think about that too. And maybe like you play your Spiral Arrow, right? And they do something that still trades with you, and maybe they don't let you get to the position that you want to be in. They pull you or they move you, and suddenly your hand is not so optimal anymore because you didn't get to do what you wanted to do. So if you can control Cammy's positioning, she's a lot worse off for it.
Okay. And can I then sort of as Cammy's opponent then, and we'll get into counterplay probably later on in this conversation too, can I as Cammy's opponent read what she's trying to hit me with next based on what she just played because of the range that she's setting for herself?
Generally, yes. I would say that Cammy's attacks are honestly pretty easy to predict. It's the fact they're annoying. She gets to kind of do what she wants and have full reign on the board. And there's generally, most characters can't do a lot about it unless they are able to tie her down and stop her from playing her game.
Okay. Interesting. All right. That makes sense. Okay, so that's our Cannon Spike, Dive Kick, Spiral Arrow. Oh, tell me about Ejection Kick. With Spiral Arrow being so good, and with her having so many other ways to set range 4, is this valuable?
It can be valuable, absolutely. I think that Spiral Arrow as an attack is so strong that the situation that you have to be in for Ejection Kick has to be perfect, right?
Okay.
So, like, if you were at range 1 against Zangief and he's threatening something ridiculous, Ejection Kick, just push him away.
Okay.
But it would have to be perfect.
Right. And I mean, like, I'm seeing, like, for example, if the opponent is at range 1, push 3, well, that's what this attack does, and it's speed 7.
Yeah.
She has plenty of ways to do that without wasting Spiral Arrow, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't used Ejection Kick very often, but it definitely has been like last resort when I have used it.
Okay, and when you're in that position, you're like, okay, well, thank goodness I have Ejection Kick because this is the use case for it.
Yeah, and even like push 3. If a lot of the time I've used it and they like are against the wall, and range 3 is fine, but this is like not a good setup for Cammy, having your opponent against the wall and you're at range 3. Like it's not great.
And that's an interesting kind of like mind warping thing that about Cammy, because for many other characters this feels great. right? But because I'm advancing past you to get most of my value out, I sort of want to keep you mid board as the Cammy player.
Yeah.
Okay,
It
I get
definitely
you.
cuts off a little bit of her kit. It also just makes it easier for, like, in this case, the Ryu player. It would be easier to make sure your attacks hit, right? She's not doing any footsie with you. She can't move past you.
Right.
And it cuts off some of the mix-ups that she wishes she could have.
Okay. And I think I know that she has a couple answers to that among her ultras, but
Yeah.
this isn't completely free counterplay that she can't do anything about. But there are times as Cammy's opponent where I might want to stick to the corner.
Yeah, I think being in the wall against Cammy is a good time. Again, she has tools to deter that, but I feel like not letting I know I said it before, but not letting her do what she wants to do is
Right.
kind of the counter to Cammy.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, let's go on to Cannonball.
Yeah.
Uh, tell me about a a range 1 to 4 spike like.
Yeah, Cannonball is really interesting. It's such a cute little card, but unfortunately it's not useful as often as you might think.
Right.
It is a spike like, which is good, but also it has no armor and guard, so it gets beat by a lot of attacks. And the critical, it's good, but it's not good enough usually for a speed 3 attack. You have to be in really good positioning, and usually they see Cannonball coming. They generally know it's going to happen when you do it. And this is when it's best in a mix-up situation when they think that you're going to be playing Spiral Arrow or something else. Because definitely, if you were to come in and they think, oh, they're going to play Spiral Arrow, and they play like a focus in response or something, you come in with the cannonball and hit them. But
Right.
people are pretty wary of it, and would, I don't know. I feel like cannonball has not won me a lot of strikes. Like, of course, it has its uses, but
Yeah. I feel like
it's
the threat of it might be important, right? Rather than actually playing it, just the fact that it's in her kit and I have to think about it.
yeah, it's really risky attack, and I would usually prefer to just play the boost.
Okay.
The boost on cannonball is skip. You get +2 speed, and at the end of your turn, you add it to your or end of your next turn, you add it to your gauge, which is super good. If anyone knows that sweep has light on it, it's +2 speed. You basically win the strike.
Yeah. A lot of times.
Yeah, generally, that speed is so valuable, and for Cammy especially, um, a higher speed is super nice because you get to play more mix-up, and it sets you up for higher speed on your ultras. For CQC, that's not as great. For gyro drive, that is great. High speed gyro drive is very fun.
I'm also seeing that is her only stat boost among her entire kit. So she's limited to her normal boosts, fierce, defend, light, and then skip for her speed boosts.
Mm-hmm.
For her stat boosts in general. And then I guess EX attacks as well, which we should probably mention as something that we can maybe come back to in a second as well.
Sure.
Something that you were saying about, like, this card gets played when they're expecting this card. It reminds me of something that Blue told me once about Ken, that Axe Kick is so scary that it lets him play Ken's Tatsu,
Mm-hmm.
which also is a speed 3 attack with some advance and no guard on it, and an ignore guard effect. So this is, from what you're saying, this card is there to stay in your opponent's head as an option that will make them have to occasionally lose to some other things that, like hang on, how am I thinking through this right? I've got to
You're all
okay,
good.
wait. Yeah, it's very hard for me to get in the Cammy mindset, I think. So I am seeing that there's a lot of cards in here that beat sweep very cleanly. For example, at range 1, this can stop sweep. This can stop sweep at range 3. This can stop sweep if it goes off. Spiral Arrow can, like, pretty much all of these cards have something that they can do against sweep, to the point that it would be I, as Cammy's opponent, would have a lot of trouble playing that card into her. Just because... All right, so now you as the Cammy player know that I'm probably not going to play sweep, and you don't have to play around it anymore. You didn't even really have to play the thing that beats sweep to get value out of this card. Am I thinking about that kind of correctly?
I mean, the situation has to be perfect, right? Sweep is so scary because it hits for 6, and 6 is a lot.
Yes,
it is. It's not a number to be shy about. It hurts. And the positioning just has to be good. I'm always scared of sweep because it hits so hard.
Right.
And even like you don't want to be trading, right? Not really, and definitely not with a sweep because you lose a card out of your hand.
Right.
So the situation really just has to be perfect. I don't know. And setting your positioning up well is why it's so important to avoid stuff like that. Not getting hit by a sweep is everything.
Gotcha. Okay, so I should be playing around it. I should be trying to keep that option out of my opponent's mind because I have so many things that do handle it.
Well, you want to make them feel comfortable playing sweep, and then you want to murder them for it, right?
Oh, okay. I get you. All right. So I'm thinking about it backwards.
So that's why playing Cammy defensively is so fun because they think like, oh, it's time. I can play the sweep, and you make them feel comfortable, and it's a false sense of security, and then you dive kick in, and they can't hit you or something else.
Right.
You know.
Okay.
And that's when Cannonball would be really good. Cannonball also, she does have tools to get the opponent off of the wall if that's where they're sitting. And Cannonball can be counted as one of those tools with the pull 3.
The pull. We didn't even talk about that. Yeah. That's true. Okay.
Yeah, it does have hit pull 3 and gain advantage. Again, Cannonball, it just gets beat by a lot of cards, unfortunately.
Right. And it's got a good boost. So that's that's a makes it difficult to play. All right, so let's talk about Razor's Edge Slicer.
Razor's Edge Slicer is another weird one. Definitely, I feel like high jump, the move 3 boost is so good for Cammy because it sets her in positioning in a good way. But Razor's Edge Slicer is one of her tools to abuse someone that's sitting on the wall because you get +2 power if they are sitting at the edge of the arena. But if you're playing against a character that really likes being at range, a Razor's Edge Slicer becomes invaluable. Becomes one of the best cards in your kit, weirdly enough. It really is super matchup dependent how you use this card.
Okay, and so if I'm not playing like a dedicated zoner, I'm maybe more comfortable playing high jump or somebody whose positional game is enough that they can stay away from that range 4 and 5. It also
it is.
Go ahead. Sorry.
It's pretty safe being a before advance 4. It's another attack where you can threaten Spiral Arrow and play something else, right? So if they're deathly scared of your Spiral Arrow and you see the opportunity to hit them with a Razor's Edge Slicer, it might be worth taking it because it being a 1 speed is pretty risky. And there are definitely people can still come in and hit you, even if they can't hit you from range with the critical.
Fair point. Okay, so it's not. So again, but against somebody with really threatening projectiles or something, this is your answer to that kind of play style. Okay,
I really love that card against like New 13, because New wants to be at range, right? And you not only do you get to not be hit, but you also get to go into range 1 or 2, right?
Right, and so it's good against that kind of zoner, maybe not against Vega or Mole Knight or somebody who is basically in Vega's case, like basically cannot throw a projectile, like they can only hit you away from range 4.
That would be a situation in which I would probably just boost with that card or use it as force.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's a situational kind of matchup dependent projectile answer. It punishes people in the corner. It sets positioning. It seems like it, for the most part, if you're getting the crit effect, it's setting you at range 1. And from what you were telling me earlier, I would need to, before I play this, I need to make sure that I have stuff that is good to use at range 1 and is effective at range 1.
Well, usually you do, right? Because Cammy's
Right.
entire hit,
her ability,
like hits where it wants to, right?
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And then we have our ultras.
Let's go.
Uh,
Her ultras are so cool.
all right, let's start with Gyro Drive Smasher.
So Gyro Drive Smasher, what a card. Only a 2 gauge, but really, really predictable. It does have the attacks range 4 or 5. At range 4 or 5, don't hit you. Super strong. You don't have to crit for it. It has before advance as far as possible, and then hit pull any number of spaces, and +1 power for each space pulled this way.
So so when you say it's predictable, is that because the use case for this card is when we're like here?
It's kind of, I have been the person that plays Gyro Drive at range 1. It doesn't happen often, but it can. It's still a mix-up option, right? And 2 gauge is pretty cheap for an ultra. It is
for an ultra that can do this much damage.
Yeah, it is relatively slow. But most people know about it. They're like, oh, a Cammy player. They look at your kit and they see Gyro Drive and they're like, wait a minute, that card is dangerous. Because it really is
coming from.
Gyro Drive can hit for like 14 EX or something, and you can come in from it. It's so safe if you're far away, but people will play around it. They know you're gonna do it, and sometimes you just gotta get rid of it for force.
Okay, and again, this is clearly another one of her. No, you cannot just stay in the corner for free. Attacks or tools, the same way that Razor's Edge, or the same way that Cannonball kind of is with the pull. This is saying, if you stay in the corner, take almost half your life for that decision, or at least be afraid that you're about to lose half your life for that decision.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the counter to Gyro Drive is focus. They play focus, and you come in and you're sad. It's still worth usually, but it's not great.
Right. Yeah, you're not getting your much of your value out of it. And you mentioned Hooligan Combination, and because Gyro Drive Smasher is such a powerful threat to keep live, how often is Hooligan Combination kind of coming up?
I don't find myself using it often, but I do think that it's super fun if you have both of your Gyro Drives to Hooligan Combination into Gyro Drive, because it's retreat 3 up to 3 and then strike. So you get into perfect positioning and then you strike, and there's not a ton that they can do about it unless they have the focus in hand, right?
Right. Okay. And then CQC, her other ultra.
Yeah.
You've got the range 1 dodge on it. So tell me about this.
So CQC, you're chilling in range 1, you're playing against a Zangief, and you don't even care because you can play CQC and they can't do anything. Attacks at range 1 don't hit you. It's also 6 power. That is the highest power that Cammy has in her kit, other than Gyro Drive, but
other than some
the hit effect. But like we were saying with Sweep earlier, 6 damage is a lot of damage. It's pretty significant. That's a fifth of your life. And it also has hit, push, or pull any number of spaces. So it sets you up for perfect positioning. I love if you are a gauge hog like I am, you can play CQC, put them at range 4 or 5 and Gyro Drive them, or put them on the other side of the board and then Gyro Drive them if you know they don't have focus.
Right. Okay. So wow. Yeah. All right. So and actually, this is before I go into this perfect segue, because you mentioned Gauge Hog. Quick question about acrobatics. So this lets you staple this range 1 doesn't hit you, attacks at range 1 don't hit you on any card in your kit. What's the value here on such a strong attack, especially?
I think acrobatics is really good, honestly. If it's early game and you're not going to have the gauge for CQC, definitely just boost acrobatics. Like, they can't come in and hit you. You can go in and hit them, or you can just let it go to your gauge and you have fuel for your spiral arrow critical, right?
Right.
Which is super good.
And when we were talking about like her other some of her other boosts. You mentioned, for example, that skip or a speed boost in general is very good for
Hmm.
Gyro Drive Smasher. Any particular cards that benefit hugely from acrobatics being in play,
Most of
or
her
is it
kit, because
it's just kind of everything?
yeah, a lot of her cards bring her into Rage 1, like,
Right.
incidentally, right? And so you can be a lot more safe, but you can also, like, if you were at range 4 and just playing a dive, or you wanted to play Assault, like, it also opens up good opportunities for your normals to be a winning trade.
Right. Okay. Man, now you've given me two great segues, and I don't know which one to pick. Um, so I guess we're talking about attacks right now, and you mentioned normals. Are there any? Uh, Obviously, dive is the big one, but is there any? Are there any normal interactions or normal attack use cases that are special for Cammy that I should be aware of? You mentioned spike and sweep already uh, earlier in the conversation, but like for example, does does this card the existence of a grasp like mean that she has freer access to fierce, for example, stuff like that? Um, is all of her amazing positioning? Does that mean that she's more able to play assault and cross rather than the boosts on those cards for positioning? Like just kind of how do you value the normals differently based on the kit that she has?
I think any card that you can use to make the positioning on the board to your advantage to set you up for what you want to do are cards that are great.
Okay.
So both Cross and Assault are very, very useful cards. Cammy loves high speed cards because a lot of her kit is deceptively slow.
Yeah,
Um,
for how annoying and difficult to hit she seems to be sometimes.
yeah,
She's not actually going that fast.
yeah, exactly. And she can be thwarted in those ways. And attacks like Cross and Assault help you cover that kind of. Because you're still able to threaten something high speed and play something low speed to mix it up. So it's almost not even that you would play them, but just that you can threaten them.
Right. Okay. And that sort of ties into what you were saying earlier about your whole kit is kind of a mix up because everything does hit everywhere and they have to think about all of it.
Yeah.
Um all right, that makes sense. And then the other segues you mentioned being a gauge hog. Um what are you what are you hold I mean ultras are great. Does Cammy have an exceed mode? Does like is there text on this side of the card? I guess
Uh,
there is. We haven't
so
discussed it.
there is text on the other side of the card. I personally almost never exceed with Cammy. I don't feel like exceeding is worth the 3 gauge. 3 gauge exceed for this effect that half of the time doesn't even do anything is just not worth it for me. I would rather critical or I would rather play an ultra.
Okay.
And even if you're sitting on 6 gauge, like set it, like, being able to say, okay, I'm gonna play CQC and then I'm gonna play Gyro Drive Smasher. And maybe
Right.
you want to critical your Gyro Drive Smasher to make them think that you're playing Spiral Arrow or something else, right?
Right.
And suddenly that
Y-
6 gauge is gone.
you are uh really good at making segues for the next question I'm going to ask because I was literally about to ask you about crit bluffing. So if you are enough of a gauge hog with Cammy that you tend to have excess gauge to the point that you know you're talking about 5 like it's you know I don't I'm not sure I the characters I play I've ever hit 5 gauge. And you're talking about that as though that's a fairly standard amount. Uh, what are some circumstances where you would bluff a crit with Cammy? You mentioned Gyro Drive Smasher to make them think it's Spiral Arrow. Any other particularly useful ones that I should know about?
I love bluffing crits. I think that Spiral Arrow is such a good card that just playing a card and critting it is it's just really good. And unless you need to save the gauge for something, which is it could definitely happen, bluffing a crit is just really strong. But they think that you're going to play Spiral Arrow, they're shaking. They're not comfortable.
Right. And you're basically saying that like crit, pretend it's Spiral Arrow, and then hit with almost anything else in the kit,
Yeah,
you're
do
feeling pretty good
something
about.
else.
do anything else, partially because then you just still have the spiral arrow for later.
Yeah.
Is it so that they are removing, if I happen to have one of the few cards that actually does do well into spiral arrow, and I want to, if I think spiral arrow is coming, I want to use that card to stop it. Well, then okay, you've bluffed the crit. I've wasted that card. I don't have it anymore. Is that kind of what you're trying to? Are you trying to bait something out of your opponent by crit bluffing, or are you just making them have to think about more things and putting pressure on them mentally that way?
Generally, when people think that you're going to play spiral arrow, they'll usually play something defensive, like a focus or sometimes a sweep, depending on positioning. And that is something that would win the trade against spiral arrow. You're still going to get hit, but you're hitting harder, and Cammy doesn't want that, right? So being able to threaten spiral arrow and play one of your cards that maybe beat these defensive cards, like dive kick, if you are able to come into range 1 and not be hit, you want to hit the cannonball and ignore guard, or even critting Razor's Edge Slicer. Because it's slow, sweep actually hits before Razor's Edge does at range 4. So sweep would go first, not hit you, and then you could come in and hit them.
Right. Okay. And now I'm starting to sort of put together some of the pieces that you've been talking about. I'm seeing like, okay, I can make my normals have before advance 3, and then I put down a crit, and I'm bluffing the spiral arrow play. And now they're in the middle of a mix up 3 layers deep. And
yeah, it becomes really complicated.
Right. Okay. And kind of her entire kit just sort of works like that and flows that way. So I need to sort of take away some of the preconceptions I have about like this card works particularly well with this card. Sometimes it's just like what you have in your hand and what you can threaten with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay. You want to set stuff up. Definitely a setup character.
Okay. But and she's setting up positioning rather than stats. She's not like a Kuma where he's setting up a big unbeatable thing.
Not at all.
You're setting up a range, and then you're threatening from that range.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. You touched on this one actually before we move on to counterplay a bit more about gauge. So in terms of game plan, overall kind of entirety of the match game plan, I'm assuming that I'm trying to get gauge early so I can threaten things. I'm trying to accrue gauge over the course of a game to threaten my big scary ultras, and then I'm trying to spend the gauge to win the game. Right? So I'm not necessarily going for an exceed effect, but I'm just trying to get gauge to get my kit online.
Yeah, you're definitely gaining and spending. You want your attacks are expensive to critical your ultras. For how much gauge you're gaining, you're spending it at almost the same time. It's very up and down, and that's why I personally don't think that exceeding Cammy is ever worth it. Her exceed side, we didn't super talk about it. It's as if you move past the opponent during a strike, your attack has hit +1 power and gain advantage, and their range includes them, which is the same as her front side. I never feel like this is worth it. You have to pass them to get this effect. You have to hit them to get this effect. If they play a card that says you can't hit them, then it's not good. And it's +1 power, which is it's okay. And gain advantage.
Kind of marginal for 3 gauge.
Yeah, it's just way too situational for me personally to think that it's worth it. I think it's important to touch also that changing cards with Cammy is really important. Because if your opponent knows what you're going to play, they know that you have the gyro drive, they know that you have the CQC, and they are not letting you do what you want to do, and they're playing around it, you have to get rid of them. Like you have to change cards, and being able to use your gauge to get card advantage is so good as well.
Okay, and she's probably not going to ever be spending force to move, because she doesn't really have much trouble with that.
Occasionally, sometimes, I I don't ever think that it's bad. I love spending one force to move one, and Ryu doesn't have to think about that. But Cammy, that can be everything. That you can win the strike
Right.
off of that one move.
Okay, so it's less that she never has to do it because she has so many tools, and more that her tools are so positioning dependent that sometimes a little nudge here and there is going to do it.
Yeah.
But you're not really advocating for a situation where you dump your whole hand to get into a certain position when you could just play high jump or backflip or many of her other strikes.
Times would be dire if you had to do that.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, and so changing cards is kind of where I'm spending some of my force. Ultras is where I'm spending a lot of my gauge. Critting is where I'm spending a lot of my gauge. Any other things to mention about economy in general, or force or gauge accumulation or expenditure that you want to touch on?
I think just one little note: crit your wild swings. If you have Spiral Arrow in your deck, crit the wild swing. Just send it.
just because that card is so important.
Yeah, and I mean, at the worst case scenario, you don't crit and you lose a gauge, and fine, that sucks. But if you do get the crit on Spiral Arrow and it works, you win the strike and you have good positioning. It can be dependent on what they're playing, but even you crit to get the Spiral, instead you ball and you ignore guard if they're slower, and suddenly it becomes good.
That's true. How often is Cammy wild swinging in your playstyle, like offensively or defensively?
I think that's just a general player preference. I mean, if you have nothing good in your hand and you don't think they win the strike, don't give up your card advantage. Just wild swing.
Right. Okay. Nope, that makes sense to me. How about let's talk about counterplay a little bit, and specifically, so we've talked for a little bit here about how Cammy does Cammy things, and it seems like, if, like a lot of Exceed characters, if she's allowed to execute her game plan flawlessly, she just kind of wins. So I'm Cammy. What is my opponent doing to stop me from doing my game plan? And how do I stop them from doing that so that my game plan can go off anyway? I guess that's the question.
I think playing faster than Cammy is easy to do and can really frustrate her. A lot of her cards, none of her cards have armor and guard on them except for Spiral Arrow criticaled. If she doesn't have the gauge to critical, you're safe pretty much to play anything quick.
Right.
And I think just not letting her control,
Right. So the thing about her not having armor and guard on her cards, does that mean that block, focus, and sweep become more valuable for her as attacks?
Yeah, as my personal play style, I think playing the normal game is so important. I love playing normals. I think normals are incredibly valuable, and all of them are good in most situations, depending.
Right.
And being able to hit with your normals and add them to your gauge is another thing that's important, right?
Right.
So using them just as much as you would use your specials. Don't disregard them as one of your tools, because they're definitely there to get you where you want to be.
Right, and she even has some things that interact very well with normals to make them more dangerous. And also, honestly, like the crit bluffing thing. When you were saying, a good use case is like they're probably going to play something slow to try to deal with the Spiral Arrow a little bit. Crit bluff spike or crit bluff dive or something like that is a very serious option that I should be considering, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to crit bluff all the time, right? Because your gauge is important to you. But if you see the opportunity and they think you're going to play Spiral Arrow, send it. Hit them with that spike.
Right. And at least make them afraid of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It definitely it makes your opponent think, right?
Yeah. So I want to let's go back to counterplay a little bit. So they're controlling Cammy, and that so playing fast is keeps her from getting her attacks off. What are other ways that characters have that could control Cammy?
I mean, there are a lot of characters that have just as much positioning tools as she does, right? So say I play a cross to get away from you, and suddenly I'm exactly where I want to be. using one of your tools to just come into like range 2.
Right.
It does not feel good. Like suddenly her hand is not nearly as good as it was because she put herself in a position that was good for her.
Right.
And you messed it up. So moving, I think, is really good. Just not letting her be where on the board that she wants to be. Keeping in mind, I feel like people don't respect dive kick enough. With the after attacks that range 1 don't hit you. They kind of just like forget about it, or they don't really care. But that strike that you don't hit her can change the course of the whole game.
Right, because she's getting engaged, you're not getting engaged. You're up on the economy game. You also did 4 damage.
Yeah, and that goes into me thinking like her playstyle is very tempo as well. You're
Right.
staying just ahead of them.
Okay, so you're not necessarily hoping to 30-0 your opponent. You're hoping to just barely keep ahead of them, and except at the same time though, you're trying not to trade with them. So that's an interesting kind of tension between those two ideas.
Yeah, I think I don't know. You play a game against Cammy and you lose a strike, and you're like, "Oh man, that sucks." But you didn't only lose the strike. You lost a card. You lost your positional advantage, and now suddenly she becomes a lot more threatening because
Right.
she has more tools, and then the game can start kind of getting away from you because she's
Right.
controlling the course of the game.
Okay, that makes sense. So I, as Cammy's opponent, am trying to deny her the positional advantage that she needs to keep her kit being threatening, and
Yeah.
you, as the Cammy player, or I, as the Cammy player, whichever, am trying to use my hopefully better tools to keep those positioning things alive,
Yeah.
play unpredictably so that they can't deal with every part of my mix up. And should I ever be like, let's say that in the use case that you just talked about, you cross out, and then on my turn I play something to run in, and suddenly it's much worse for you because your hand is not as good. How do you prevent yourself from just spending every turn that you're playing setting up position? Right. Again, I'm thinking about this in terms of the sort of my defensive set play mindset is make a strike unbeatable. If I'm spending every turn I'm using as Cammy to get to the range where my hand works, and all my opponent has to do is keep following me around, I'm never going to win. So at some point, do I just have to mix them up? Go ahead. Sorry.
I would say like don't get too caught up into it. Like Cammy's kit is well designed, and you just let the kit play itself. Honestly, her cards will help you, and I would say that striking will generally get you where you want to be, unless they play something to counter it, of course. But a card like Spiral Arrow, this is also why Spiral Arrow is so important, because it sets you up in the position that you want to be most of the time.
Right.
Even if you're far away, it brings you in to play CQC or Cannon Spike, which are great cards. And if you're close range and you don't want to be, you can Spiral Arrow away. You still hit them. Something I talk about with Spiral Arrow, if you use both of your Spiral Arrows in the early game, you got lucky, you should be thinking about reshuffling, like, soon. Not having your...
Just to get those back.
Yeah, not having your Spiral Arrow is really bad, and it feels bad to not have it as an option.
Right.
Her kit is definitely incredibly lacking without it, I feel, as just having it as an option.
Okay.
So a reshuffle may be needed.
Gotcha. And this card is important enough, it sounds like, that is my opponent going to be trying to parry it, or are the ultras so threatening that maybe I can keep this card active in my deck because they're not parrying it?
I would say that people occasionally parry Spiral Arrow. It doesn't happen all the time. Some people prefer playing block instead of parrying. I find that more often than not, people like playing block, or at least people that I've played against. If Gyro Drive and CQC are really easy to play around, and they may parry one of them if they're just tired of playing around it. Like, man, I'm really sick of this Gyro Drive. Can you just get rid of that?
Right.
But they generally know that you have them or that you're setting up for them.
Right. And you mentioned when we were discussing these ultras that sometimes if they're playing around it well enough and they don't seem to be getting tired of it, you might ditch them as force or use them as a boost or something like that instead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So don't let let your opponent if when you're threatening your ultras and you're sort of playing that dance of trying to keep your ultras online, if you realize that it's not working or if your opponent realizes that that dance is stifling them, those ultras might disappear kind of just over the course of the game, either you spending them as force or your opponent getting rid of them themselves.
Yeah, sometimes you can really catch yourself tunneling on gyro drive. You're like, man, I really want to play this card. It's so cool. And they're sitting there like, I'm really sick of this. Like, I'm not going to stop playing around it. And you're just sitting there doing nothing. Right?
I've had this focus in my hand for 25 turns now. Please let me just play reading or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So if you find yourself low on resources when you're trying to set up the gyro drive really hard, like if you're paying your force to move, and they're kind of attritioning you and they're paying force to move to not let you want to not let you do it, right?
Right.
It can be really frustrating. And those are the times when, if you're spending more resources than you're gaining to try and get the gyro drive off, it's probably better to just get rid of it.
It's probably not worth it anymore, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe if they're actively playing around it, maybe they're playing around it in a way that sets you up for better strikes with other cards that you have or something like that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
maybe keep it in your hand, but get it out of your mind as something that you're trying to win with, and say, well, okay, they're not going to the corners. Well, that's keeping the rest of my kit kind of online because I can now advance past them and dodge them more easily. So
yeah, that's absolutely something that's really nice is people generally stay away from the wall because of gyro drive, and that makes it easier to play the rest of your kit.
okay, all right, that's good to know. So one other thing, because with every other guide that I've done so far, which at the moment is Akuma and Viper. It's not a it's a young show still, but
Sure.
we were able to discuss the cards kind of in a vacuum because they had like pretty pronounced use cases. If we're talking about Ryu's Donkey Kick, for example, we're talking about a range 1 to range 2 card where you're not really even ever going to be discussing it outside of that specific like band of range. With Cammy's kit, all of this stuff, it now that we've been talking for quite a while on it, basically all of this stuff it does sort of hit everywhere, and we should probably be talking about it more in terms of what things look like on the board when you might be playing it. So it's like from what you have told me, this card is literally only a range 1 option. Cannon Spike is.
Yeah, and generally,
there are no other times to be using this.
unless you slide.
Right. Unless you slide.
Sorry. Oh, you don't have to slide. Sorry, that's different. But like, I don't know. You have options.
Okay. Then dive kick. It sounds like you mostly want to play this in a way that will end you at range 1. So either from here or from here. But but if I'm trying to establish range 3 in particular, actually it's still range 2. If I'm trying to get to range 2 in particular, is there value there, or am I mostly trying to play it from here or from here?
You usually want to play it from range 3 or range 2. You can play it from range 1. You have to keep in mind you pass them, you still hit them, which can sometimes beat them if they play something like dive. It becomes valuable. But
right. And is there anything in particular in my hand that really, really benefits from being at range 2 that I would want to end up at range 2 from dive kick? Among her specials, I'm not really seeing anything.
Yeah, range 2 is definitely not my favorite, but it's not like you don't have any options. You definitely still have the rest of your kit open to you. You just have to be smart about playing it. And Cammy loves playing Cross. Cross is so good because it sets her up for any of her advanced force.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So that's those two. Spiral Arrow, play it from anywhere it will hit, is basically what you're saying.
Pretty much.
Play it anywhere from anywhere it will hit, and also where it will set you up for the rest of your hand. So if I have CQC in my hand, play it from here. If I have Razor's Edge Slicer, play it from here. Or rather, play it from here. Is that accurate? You play this card in a way that it will set up your next strike well, because it's gonna hit. It's gonna win combat anyway. Let's try to get as much value out of it as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And if like you as the opponent are like worried about the Spiral Arrow, you can, if you can stun it with higher speed, it is really, really good. So if you have like a speed boost in your kit, know that Cammy is going to play the Spiral Arrow defensively. Like she's going to do it. Whatever you hit with, she's going to play the Spiral Arrow. And if you maybe you play like a +2 speed and then you play sweep, suddenly your sweep is speed 4 and you're beating the Spiral Arrow, right?
Right. And there's not a lot of stuff that naturally has speed 4 that can beat 5 effective guard. So that speed boost changes the math. Okay. So and actually, I talked about Donkey Kick as an example of a Ryu attack a second ago. That's actually one of the few cards that could, on offense at least, deal with Spiral Arrow.
Yep.
So when I'm preparing for a matchup with Cammy, is that something that I'm looking for in particular? Like, do they have any answers to Spiral Arrow?
I mean, everyone has answers to Spiral Arrow, right? Like they can. I think dive is a fine answer because you dive past her and then she doesn't hit you, and she'll come into range 1, which can be great for depending on the character that you're playing, right?
Right. Okay. So that's actually probably worth mentioning, that when we say something is unbeatable or something like that, there's a big asterisk next to it. There's something somewhere in the game that will deal with this card well, but it's just not common.
Yeah, Spiral Arrow, like it gets scarier when you don't have any options, and then suddenly Cammy, she gets to do exactly what she wants to do. She hits you for 5, which is a great amount of damage, and then she runs away to go do something else.
Right. Okay, and that's sort of speaking to what you're saying about letting Cammy control the pace of the game. If their options are down that prevent them from dealing with Spiral Arrow, it's much freer.
Yep.
Sounds good. And then Cannonball, in terms of the range game. I mean, there's no place to play this where it's going to be, on curve or even particularly safe.
Yeah, Cannonball definitely is a peculiar case, and it really depends on what they have and if you think that you can get the mix up. Most of the people that I've tried to play Cannonball against are playing around it. So it becomes kind of frustrating to try and find a place to play it. It feels great when you hit it. It just doesn't happen often.
Right. And so they're playing around it by trying to play something above curve or on curve honestly, it doesn't even have to be that. It can be below curve, but not as below curve as Cannonball, and it will still beat it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of characters have tools at like speed 4 or 5 that can not beat Spiral Arrow, but get around it, and they also beat Cannonball, so they're just going to play that.
That's a good point, that almost anything that would beat this card also beats this card. So you can't really mix these two up, can you? If I think you're playing Spiral Arrow and I'm playing to beat Spiral Arrow, I've also kind of beaten Cannonball by default.
Not always. Like if they are expecting you to come in and they want to play something defensive to just with you, then that's where you could play the Cannonball. But you have to be really smart about predicting what your opponent is going to play.
Okay, so my mix-ups, I probably need a mix-up to make Cannonball work correctly. In order to do that, the range that I'm standing at is going to dictate what is most threatening in terms of what I might be putting down that my opponent has to think about, right? So if I'm standing here and I need them to be thinking about something other than Cannonball, that something is probably dive, because they're going to then play sweep or focus that will catch and trade up on the dive. So I can I have something there. If I am at range 1, I guess there's a mix-up between Cannon Spike and Cannonball?
I mean,
because they're
range
trying to
one.
play slow.
Yeah, range one for Cammy is a really good mix-up range because you're also threatening CQC and you're also
Right.
threatening everything else in your kit to move past them,
Right.
right?
Okay, so here's some cards then at range 1 in particular that could make Cannonball a little bit more possible to play.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned the pull 3. So there's additional use cases here, in which case Cannon Spike suddenly is no longer part of the mix-up because it doesn't actually beat anything. But CQC definitely is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have
Okay,
to remember, if you happen to be at this range, if they're also scared of gyro drive, right? So if you think like they think that I'm going to play the gyro drive here, I'm going to critical, and they know that you're the type of player to fake the critical, right? Then you critical the cannonball, and suddenly you beat the focus.
Right, you put the focus down in the cannonball. Okay, all right. So she does have ways to make this very, very threatening, but it requires other cards being active in the opponent's mind.
Yeah, it definitely, you have to play the mind game.
Yep. Sounds great. Okay. So that's those. It occurs to me that I really should have been talking about Cammy's kit in this way with the ranges on the board earlier, because her stuff is so positioning dependent, but now I know better. Razor's Edge Slicer, I mean, to me, it seems like the obvious one is that as long as you are at range 4 or 5 is when you want to play this card. If they're in the corner, that's even better.
Yeah, if they're not threatening something higher speed that can come in and hit you, if they have something that advances, it becomes a lot more risky.
Right. And so I'm looking again for potential things to stop their mix up. So if I'm playing it from here, for example, dive is if I'm initiating with Razor's Edge Slicer, they might be a little bit afraid to respond with dive because my dive would outspeed theirs.
Yeah.
So that could potentially be useful. I'm trying to think of other situations where you might be able to catch them out and make this a little bit safer by threatening something else. Again, kind of her whole kit sort of feels like that.
Well, I mean, at this range, you're threatening a lot of things, and Razor's Edge is just another one of your options that happens to be really strong against range characters that aren't able to play around it very well, right?
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
Definitely, if you're like struggling to play against the attacks that range 4 or 5 hit you, playing something to like pull her before pull is so good against Cammy. It's so frustrating.
Okay, so it just something that disrupts her positioning, but in a way that she can't react to because it's happening during a strike.
Yeah, not a lot of characters can do that have like a before pull, but the ones that do,
right?
So annoying.
Suddenly, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. And this card being so slow, they don't even need to play like a fast card to disrupt the positioning. They just can play anything above speed 1.
Yeah.
Okay. CQC, obviously, just like with Cannon Spike, there's really no use cases here outside of range 1, so this is actually kind of easier to talk about in terms of the positional game.
Yeah, unless you think they're going to play dive. If they to come into you, you can respond with CQC, and it's a pretty good option.
Gotcha. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, because this isn't a before effect. This is just the whole time the strike is going on. I'm invincible at range 1, so they can start here, and it won't be in their mind.
Or if they're threatening like assault, a ton of characters have an assault and they come in and they don't hit you, and then you destroy them.
Totally. Okay, that never would have occurred to me. That's good to know that you don't actually need to be at this range because they might take you to this range. In my head, this was a before effect, but that makes way more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Gyro Drive Smasher, we actually already did discuss a little bit that this is basically your corner killer tool. The farther away you are, the safer it is. But like what is? And you've said that you play this at range 1 as part of the mix up.
I have, yeah.
What is sort of the band that you would feel relatively safe playing this? Is it the 4 or 5 because of the they don't hit you thing?
I think 4 or 5 is definitely the best. 5 is prime because then they can't dive and get the value.
Right.
Um, but I mean, it's another mix-up tool, right? Like even at range 1 and they're against the wall, they're thinking, "Ah, she's not going to play gyro drive. It's beat through. I
Sure.
beat that." And then you
Yeah.
play it, and they look
And-
like a fool, right?
and they die. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's 12 damage. That's too much
Yep.
damage
Yep.
for 2 gauge. And obviously, like, don't play. Well, actually, no, you can still play it here for a little bit less. Like, where would you not play this card? Is it when they're in the middle?
It really is dependent on what tools they have to avoid it, and less
Right.
on positioning. It's more like, are they going to play something that counters gyro drive? Am I just going to get spiked right here? Like, what are
Right.
my odds of hitting the gyro drive, and what can they do to avoid it? Do they see it coming, and are they going to play something that will beat it?
Okay. No, that all makes sense to me. All right. So I've got a couple more. We're up on about an hour and 20 here. And,
Okay.
a couple more questions about a couple sort of just minor parts of her kit. But so far this has been great. The only other thing that I want to know about is whether there are any things about EX attacks that become, obviously EX attacks just like they make stuff better. They're just generally strong options. Are there any particular interactions that are noteworthy that make a certain attack be substantially better when EX'd? Or, in the case of maybe Spiral Arrow, maybe try to avoid EXing it because you won't be able to use it again later. Stuff like that.
Let me think. I don't think I ever EX Spiral Arrow, even if I have both of them in my hand, because you
Right.
want to be able to play both of them. Generally,
Yeah, just play it twice.
yeah, absolutely. You're gonna get both of them in your gauge, most likely.
Right.
I feel like her boosts are so good that I don't feel like EXing is always super great. Of course, if you're in a checkmate situation, and you can get them with that extra speed or that extra power, it
Right.
becomes really valuable, right?
Yeah.
But it really depends.
I'm not seeing any like magic breakpoint math from EXing something. I guess
Not anything
Razor's
like
Edge
out of the
Slicer.
normal.
Yeah, I guess Razor's Edge Slicer when they're in the corner hits 7, and 7 is a special number.
Yeah.
But other than that, like her kit is not devastatingly high damage enough to make those breakpoints present themselves pretty easily. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that anything is too crazy on the EX. It's really just, how you would normally play EX attacks against anyone is trying to outplay them or hit them and stun them, right?
Sure. Yep, that makes sense. So at least that part of her game plan is at least fairly normal.
hmm
All right. So this is I guess, do you have any other things that you want to mention about Cammy before we wrap this up? I actually do have one more question to close it out, but before I do, anything that you want to say about her game plan?
I think we mostly talked about everything. I think Cammy is a character that, at least for me, I like playing characters that feel really good on defense, and I feel like when your opponent is striking into you, you have so many options,
Right.
and it's easier to predict that they're going to play, and then playing a mix-up or outplaying it, right?
Okay, and then you're spending your turns setting the range so that you can do that again on their turn.
Exactly. Yeah, you spend your turn setting up or playing a strike that sets you up, right?
Right, which many of them do. All right, so it's not like a defensive set play character where you're waiting for your opponent to strike and you're spending your turn boosting or something. You're
Yeah.
striking as setup. That's
Yeah.
kind of what I have to remember about Cammy.
I think it's generally better if you can to strike for setup. I think it's more beneficial to you from a card advantage standpoint.
Right.
But it's just one option. Don't like put yourself into a corner and thinking that that's the only thing that you can do. Like, you have many ways to get where you want to be. Don't be afraid to spend force. Don't be afraid to change cards, and don't be afraid to spend your gauge. Like, let it go.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. So my final question actually is you mentioned being sort of a Cammy one trick. It's about other characters like Cammy. And this might not be something that you can talk about actually, because you are like, there might be no one like Cammy. She might be it. But if other players of different characters are watching this guide and have never considered Cammy before, but they play, I don't know, Vega, or they play like who plays anything like Cammy that they might vibe with, or if they're a big fan of Cammy, is there another character that feels sort of similar in some ways that they should try out for more of that flavor, or is Cammy completely unique in the cast?
I think Cammy is really interesting because it really depends on what you like about her.
Mhm.
So for me, I love attacks that say, you can't hit me, and I get to play
Right.
the mix-up game. I really like Aurier for that same reason. She has a couple things that say you can't hit me, and I love being able to mix up with that kind of thing. And I love characters that feel good on defense. So like your opponent is striking into you, and you feel like you own the world, and
Right.
having that outplay potential. I feel like Cammy really shines in that way, and other characters that shine when they're playing on defense would probably be good options as well.
Okay. Awesome.
I think.
Please go ahead.
Sorry. There are characters that are like Cammy in that if you really like her mobility and positioning, you could play something like Merkava if you really just like moving around the board. There
Right.
are lots of characters that move around a lot, and
Right.
Cammy definitely does that, but she's a little unique in the way that she does. Right.
Right. And that other stuff like Merkava, or I mean, I'm thinking about uh, Vega or Mole Knight or who else? Who else is a big Propeller Knight or Bang or other characters, but
Hmm.
they aren't really hitting those other components that you're discussing. So maybe if you're looking for those things, don't just look for another high mobility character. Look for somebody else who has those things if that's what you like.
Yeah, Cammy, she's so unique. She, because of her UA, opens up a whole new world,
Yeah.
and that's so cool. And I don't think that any character really does that in quite a unique way as she does.
I remember, I think the one time I've actually played Cammy for myself, it was very, very early in my Exceed career. And in that one game, I became so used to um, my my UA having that sort of range flexibility that I moved to another character and immediately missed it. That I was just like, wait, when I move past my opponent, I don't just hit them automatically? What?
Yeah,
So I
and
I can see that that's hard to replicate.
you're looking for that from your opponent as well. Like, they have to constantly be thinking about Cammy's UA. If they for 1 second think, "Oh, dive's not going to hit me here," it will.
Right. It will. Yeah.
And
And that's when you play dive.
yeah, Cammy loves playing that mind game.
Yeah. All right. Well, all right. We are coming up on an hour and a half of Cammy conversation. This has been wonderful. Viddie, thank you so much for teaching me, and hopefully by extension other people who are interested in learning about Cammy. Honestly, like, I'm fine if nobody ever watches this and I just got to learn about Cammy from an expert. That's the secret grift here, is that like I'm pretending to publish these, but these are all just for me, is the secret.
Well,
But
I
seriously,
definitely.
I
Sorry,
really
go
do
ahead.
appreciate it. No, no, please go ahead.
No, like I'm happy to share Cammy with anyone, and I want to spread the love for Cammy far and wide. I think it is important to remember. I know we kind of disclaimed it. I'm not the perfect Cammy player or the perfect Exceed player, and my opinions are not all knowing. And there are definitely different play styles, and I'm sure there are different ways to play Cammy as well. But I'm happy to play her and how I think about her.
Definitely. And as we said during that disclaimer, I said it in kind of like a flippant way about like come on the show and show us why we're wrong. But when there are really, really different perspectives on how a character is played, like that's to me, that's kind of what makes Exceed interesting. That okay, well we have different viewpoints of what this game even is and how to play it, and we can settle it by playing it and figuring out like okay is my way of thinking about this game how does it measure up to yours because we're both trying to leverage that way of thinking in how we play. So if you like Cammy but you think no, you know what, actually Cannonball's an amazing card all the time. um I want to know about that. I want to be able to say in a year, put a little postscript in the description of the video and say that so and so player who I've never heard of just swept a tournament with Cammy, and they did it using a strategy that we never considered. So
Yeah.
so please do experiment and play around with these characters, even if they feel like they have one way of playing with them.
Yeah, if you disagree with any of my points about Cammy, I would love to hear. I love this character a lot, and I'm always happy to learn more. I know there are some people that like to exceed with Cammy. You know, tell me why. Like, comment on this video. Let's talk about it. You know.
Yeah, I want to find out. All right. I think that's going to do it for this episode. We're going to make our way through some more season 3 in the future, and then hopefully we're going to cover the rest of the roster. So, Viddie, thank you so much again for being on. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. And I will see everybody later on. Goodbye.